Alright, hi everybody, this is Shay. This is going to be an Illustrator demo, probably the first of a couple of demos to help you get familiar with using Illustrator for this branding project we're working on. Some of you may have used this in the past, and some of you are probably new to Illustrator, so I'm going to go over some of the basics of it. You'll find some things that are very similar to the work you've been doing in InDesign. They're both Adobe products, so there are some things that are consistent across all of their applications. So that will help you with some of the things you're going to need to do. I'm currently using Illustrator Creative Cloud 2015. If you're subscribing to Creative Cloud, that's probably the version you've downloaded and are using. So I'm just going to give you the basic intro to the software and what it does, and then I'll split some of the more complex tasks into smaller videos that will hopefully help you through this assignment. So the first thing you want to do is open up Illustrator, and I'm on a Mac, so some of you using Windows machines will probably may see things a little bit differently, but not too much. So I'm on Mac. I'm going to go to File, New, do a new document. I'm going to call it just Test for this. You're going to use for this assignment, you'll want to use a letter size, and you can inspect that here in size letter. If you want to, you can switch to inches. For print stuff, I usually work with inches. Just because it's the point of reference that I am more familiar with. Something you do want to make sure that you check is you'll see this align new objects to pixel grid. You want to make sure that is unselected. You do not want that checked. That has to do with your designing art for web pages, basically, and it does some things that are a little weird. If you're not familiar with that. So go ahead and make sure that is not selected when you create your document. If it's going to be a print document or something like this branding project, then hit OK. And you'll have an 8.5 by 11 page. You'll see the interface is pretty close to your InDesign interface. The first thing you want to do is locate the toolbar. And that's typically here on the left-hand side of the document. If it's not there for some reason, you would go to Window, scroll down, or actually, I'm sorry, scroll up and Tools, Default. Okay, so you'll have your new document. This is called the pasteboard in Illustrator. That will become important later, but you'll see your new document is created as what's known as a pasteboard. In your Tools palette, you've got the Selection tool, which you should know from InDesign. You've got the Direct Selection tool, and you'll see the Pen tool. We've worked with that a little bit in InDesign, and Type tool, and some different shape tools and line tools. And I'm going to go over those quickly here in just a second. Okay, so Illustrator is what's known as a vector art program. And the gist of what that means is that it uses math to create shapes. Unlike Photoshop or something that creates more realistic images, Photoshop being the main one, those are pixel-based raster images. And what that means is each document is made up of millions of pixels of different colors, different values to create the images you see. With a vector program, what you're seeing is objects that are basically created by math. So if I click here and draw a rectangle, and then if I click on my selection tool, I'll see that this rectangle has 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and then a point in the center. In Illustrator, you have a couple ways you can view an element. We are looking at it in preview mode, which if I assign a color to this box, you can see that this is the preview mode. This is what it would look like ideally as the finished image. There's also a mode in which you can view it as the outline, which just shows you the outline of the shape you've just created. And that's basically the way you create shapes in Illustrator. Text or anything, it's really an outline, a series of connected points, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you've seen those in InDesign probably, and you can take those points and reshape them to create a new shape or change your shape. And what happens with a vector program is you create points, they're connected by math. The computer works out whatever calculations it needs to connect this point to this point to this point, and so on. So when you're creating a shape or an image in a vector program, that's basically what you're doing. You're taking a series of points and connecting them with lines, sometimes straight lines, sometimes curved lines. Okay, so that's totally different than the way Photoshop works. Uh, in this shape palette here, you got a rectangle tool, so you can click and drag a rectangle. You can hold down the Shift key and click and drag, and you constrain it so it's a square. It's equal on all sides. If you click, and on a Mac, it's the Option key, and click, you will get a space where you can you get a dialog where you can set the size of the box you want to draw. There is a key on Windows to do that. I'm not sure. It's one of those keys at the bottom, probably Alt. But you can click that and you call up a dialog box. So those are some rectangles you can draw. If you click and hold, you get a rounded rectangle. And what you can do is click and drag, and it'll have a preset curve there. And so that creates a box with curved corners. If you option click, you get a dialog where you can also change the corner radius and drag it out like that. So you can kind of create more of a pill shape. And sometimes for logo design, that's a shape that you may commonly see. That's how you would go about that. And then you can click and drag, and subsequent rounded corner boxes will adopt this particular corner radius. You can draw ellipses, so you can draw ovals. Shift, again, will give you a constrained circle. And again, you can do an ellipse with a width and a height. You can do polygons. Click and drag. It starts with a 6-sided polygon. You can hold down the Shift key and constrain it, but then it's going to want to snap to an angle. It's kind of weird like that. But you can click and drag and kind of change the way that's working. All right. So there's a 6-sided. If you want to draw or change the number of sides, you can option click, and 3 sides will get you a triangle, and 8 will get you an octagon, and so on and so forth. Then you have the star tool, which does exactly what it sounds like. It will draw a star. You can hold down the Shift key and constrain it. You can release the Shift key and drag at different angles. You can option click and change the radius, and that's going to change the kind of shape of this. So let's change this radius to 2 inches and this one to 1 inches and see what we get. Not a lot of difference there. Let's do a bigger difference. Okay, so you can see that this star is not quite as, I guess, chunky as that one, for lack of a better term. Okay, so by changing that radius, we kind of change this shape versus this shape. All right, what you can also do is you can change the number of points in your star. So you could have more of a shape like that. Okay, so those are just kind of basic shapes you can use in Illustrator to get started creating your objects. Something else I want to show you real quickly is, and this is kind of the same as InDesign. So I've drawn a shape and I want to resize it. I get the selection tool, I click it, and in Illustrator it wants to grab that. Okay, so what you'll want to do is grab this tool, the transform tool, And you can do that and grab a corner, and you can resize it that way. You'll get this little pop-up dialog thing here. This is a free transform, which means you can grab these things and change them and alter it. This is the perspective distort. What that does is if I grab those corners, it distorts along this line, and I can kind of start playing around with perspective. This is the free distort, which lets me grab individual corners and start to change the shape that way. And this will constrain it so that I can't, if I turn that on, I can't change, like stretch or squash it. If I turn that off, I can, I can then, make it thinner, shorter. Okay. So those are some basic Illustrator tools for creating shapes. You have the line tool, and with the line tool, what you do is you click and drag lines out. So that's pretty self-explanatory. As in InDesign, though, you can draw a line. You can use this stroke setting up at the top, and this applies to any object, shapes, lines, whatever. If I change this, you're not seeing it change. That's because I'm in outline mode. So if I go back, and I know I'm making this change to the point size, and go view GPU preview, that shows me again the more accurate display. So I can take my shape, I can change its line. As in InDesign, I can click and change its color. I can change the type of line it is. So I can play around with these lines and get some different shapes. I can change and use some more artistic line shapes. So if I click this, it's like a charcoal line, and so I get this. So you can play around with these different things here and kind of shape these lines a little bit. Now this is a really limited set. It's kind of the basic set. So when I click here and call up this palette and click on this little drop down, it gives me the option to open a brush library. These are things you can play around with. I'm not going to go through many of these, but I'll just open one. It's the Artistic Ink palette or brush library. So these I can click and apply to this line, and you get all these really kind of seemingly random shapes, but you can apply them to any line you create, and they will also accept color. So we could do kind of this brush stroke thing on just a straight line. If I draw an ellipse, I can apply the same thing to it and get more of a hand-drawn brush stroke kind of look. The other thing is your shapes work just like InDesign. You can assign a color, a fill color. If I click on that, it'll give me a little pop-up, and I can pick my color from there. For the first part of the assignment, though, you should be working in black and white, really, to get kind of the logo shape down just right. So this is kind of the basic intro to creating shapes in InDesign. I'm going to go ahead and, or in Illustrator, sorry. I'm going to log off of this one, and then I will do another one with the pen tool, and I'll do another one with the type tool. And so I'll have probably 3 or 4 for you this week to go through and look at. So this will at least let you get familiar with using Illustrator.